Hey guys, BJ here, back with a Tyranid full faction tier list for you. I'm going to take you through all of the cards in the Tyranid faction. I know we've got a lot of new players recently, but also existing players should find this useful too as we go through and review each card on a 1 to 5 star system. 1 is unplayable, 2 is a bad card, 3 is situational, usually means that it can be good in the right situations, but often it sort of is a little bit meh, bit okay. Good is the 4-star cards, and we'd hope that most of your decks will be built out of the good cards. And then 5 stars are those kind of like S tier must-have cards. So we're going to go through and look at the cards, and then I'll give you a little bit at the end just in terms of crafting, specifically the legendary cards, like which I think I would focus on. So if this sounds good to you, hit that like button below, and also follow along. Let me know in the comments anything that you agree with or anything that you have to add to the conversation. Always more fun these videos when we get a bit of conversation going in the chat and messages. All right, let's dive on in. Well, the Hive Fleet Leviathan is a very powerful faction, I think, and I did a intro video just recently, so I would definitely check that out if you've not seen it. Alright, first of all, when it comes to the unplayable cards, these are the 1 out of 5 stars. Now, you can still play them and have fun with them and stuff, but in a serious deck, they are pretty unplayable. The first one's Bestial Rage. Bestial Rage came out in the expansion. It says double the melee attack of a friendly troop. The problem with this card is it's meant to be like a big finisher, but it doesn't really make sense because what card do you play this on? Like, what unit do you want to suddenly attack twice? It's so expensive that you can't exactly buff it with things like Adrenal Surge and then do this. And it also is in a faction that has Ravenous Hunter, which is just a way better way of boosting the amount of damage that you can do on board to finish. We'll come on to that card, obviously, which is definitely not unplayable later. So this card is a big waste of time. I don't think I've ever seen anybody play it. Alrighty, what else have we got next? So I think people said they like it when I make the cards bigger when we're talking about them, so let me know what you think. But anyway, the Horror Specs is one of these big Tyranid drops. Now, this problem the faction has in general is that a lot of the more expensive energy-wise cards are just a bit useless in the Tyranids. This one, it has the 8 melee, but it has 2 range. It does nothing on the turn it arrives with only 8 health and no armor. And if it ever does get to strike, not that it ever will, because it'll just die to people attacking its range attack, which is only 2, which is shocking at 8 energy. It says that it would theoretically heal itself by 4. This might be the worst card in the game, guys. Like, this is so bad. It's not even like heal. It heals itself. I don't get it. This is shocking. I feel like we should create a 0 stars for this card. It is horrendous. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna put it here because it's just awful. All right, what else we got? Next up, we got the Apex Predator. Now, a lot of factions have a card like this. It says give invulnerable and 2 range attack to a friendly unit this turn. The 2 range attack is probably the most useful thing about this. I mean, like. 5 energy. Most of the other faction cards that have this invulnerability for 1 turn is like, it's usually 4 energy. Remember, this is not in your opponent's turn. It only makes you invulnerable at your turn when you attack. Then it's your opponent's turn, they kill whatever it is. It's a big fat waste of energy, and it basically just means you lose tempo for essentially 1 trade. The only time this ever really makes sense is like, if your opponent's got an 8 or 9 drop on the board, and you've got an 8 or 9 drop on the board, and you want to kind of clash and delete his unit whilst keeping your unit the same, then something like this would make sense. How often does that happen in a game of Warpforge? Maybe 1 in 1,000 games if you're lucky. So yeah, it's unplayable, guys. It's unplayable. Alright, so next up we've got the Swarming Masses. Create 3 random Leviathan troops with Swarm in your hand. I mean, it's a form of card draw that costs 4, but the cards that you get are random. They're not ones you put in your deck. So you may get 1 useful card. You've lost a load of tempo because you spent 4 energy doing this. It's just a really bad thing to do. Remember that Tyranids tend to win by building a better board than their opponent. You can't be taking a turn off to do that. Okay, next up we've got the Termagant. Now the Termagant's a weird one because I'm rating this as a card that you would actually put in your deck, not card that comes out of the Tervigon, whenever you use its Warlord power. Obviously, the Termagant in a Tervagon-specific deck, which we'll talk about more, is actually pretty powerful, but as a card that you could take from the collection and stick in your deck, you don't even do that in the Tervagon deck, guys. So I think as a standalone card, this is a terrible card. It has awful stats. The Tide doesn't really scale in a way that helps it, and yeah, you shouldn't be playing it. Do not play that card. Now, this card I played the other day in a practice match, and I attacked with it, and I went, oh my god, have you seen the animation when this card attacked? Guys, if you've not seen the animation when this card attacks, go and put it in a deck right now. Go and play on practice, or play with your mate, and just attack with it. Because honestly, it's worth... we should give it an extra star just for having the best animation, or one of the best animations in the game. The whole thing goes green, and it's really cool, really cool. That's all there is good to say about this card, guys. Like, I know it's got 14 health, which looks kind of fancy, but the thing is, the reality is that at 10, coming down, doing nothing on the turn it's supposed to attack, it's just way too late. What will happen with Tyranids if you play this card is you'll have already won the game, right, by the time you get to... So you'll never play it, or you'll have already lost the game, and you'll play this, and because you're so far behind on board, it'll just get taken out anyway. So it'll never be useful, basically, in Tyranids. So it's just not a good card. Unplayable. This card is the only thing I've ever seen remotely questionably viable for this is when you run the legendary Hive Fleet Leviathan, which makes everything cheaper. So, like, the idea that if this costs 3, and then potentially you played Overwhelming Swarm, it then costs 2. Playing 3 of these out for 6 energy, you know, 15 health for 6 energy, that's suddenly very good, right? But that's so situational, and also there's so many other Tide units that we could say the same about, and they're just better and would get better value. So that's why I'm putting this as a 1 star. Next up, we've got the X-Creen, another one of these late game do nothing cards, right? Drop it for 8, you've done absolutely nothing. It doesn't have armor. It's only got 4 melee attacks, so it's so easy to clear. Yeah, you can even hit that in the face with your Warlord, right? Take the 4 damage. So you've only got a clear 7. At 8 energy. Wow. Shocking. They're so underpowered. They're so bad, these late game units. Look at the more recent late game units, like in the Astra Militarum and stuff. Yeah, just not even comparable. Okay, so this is the Tyranid. It's a 6-drop. Now, it has good health for a 6-drop, and it's flying. So, I quite like that. But they changed its talent to aerial seeding. And, yeah, I've never seen it played. Since that change, I think before that I saw it played a little bit, but I honestly, guys, have never seen that card played. We look at some good 6-drops in a minute. That is not what you want to be playing. And speaking of good 6-drops and 6-drops you don't want to play, here's another one you don't want to play. It is a common card, so if you're a beginner, it's absolutely fine to put in to start with until you get the better cards. But it's basically a Vanguard, a cheap Vanguard. Sorry, it's a common card Vanguard. So. Yeah, if you put this in because you want Vanguard, I can understand that in a beginner deck, but very, very quickly you'll get rid of it as you open up much better cards. It doesn't have the armor that the Hive Guard has. Sorry, that the Tyrant Guard has, which we'll come on to. And only 3 melee. It's going to get cleared very, very quickly and very, very easily. Really, really understated and undervalued for a 6-drop this day and age. Alright, next up we have got the other Termagant, which... Standard Termagant. It's very standard as well. The only thing I like about this is the 3 health. No Tide. Yeah, why would you ever play this? What does it do? Absolutely nothing is the answer. I just cannot think of one reason why you would play that card. Yeah, it's bad. And another card that's bad on its own is the Spore Mine. Dropping this for 1, and then basically it just automatically dying at the start of your next turn. It's just bad. It's just bad. Like, you play it, your opponent can kill it for free. You know, his Warlock can just range attack it and it's dead. You think about something like the Necron spell, what it's called. One that basically just does damage, essentially. you know, from hand. This is like, please survive and I'll do some damage. Oh, but even then it's random. It's awful. It's awful. Don't play this card, guys. It is a terrible, terrible card. Right, so now we've got rid of all the terrible cards. Let's look at some of the bad cards. Now, remember with the bad cards, these are 2 stars out of 5. They're not unplayable, right? So there will be, you know, certain wacky builds that you might find an okay spot for them. They're just not very good. So let's have a look at those. So the first one is Darkened Skies. Now, this did recently get a buff. This is why it's not a 1 star. It says deal 1 damage to all enemies. There are certain metas where this card, I admit, should be probably a 3 star situational card. Particularly Scarab metas. When Scarabs are meta, this is a tech card that Tyranid players want to put in their decks for sure. Now, outside of that, I don't think this is a good card for Tyranid. It doesn't build on the Tyranid faction synergies, right? You can't trigger Synapse with it. You know, potentially in a Neurothrope, you know, you could use it as an artifice, but it's, you know, it's not building on Synapse and Swarm. And we have a really good AoE that's way better than this one. So generally, spots are tight in the deck for a good Tyranid deck, so I don't think you can afford to waste one with that. It's not unplayable. Like I say, teched in the right metas, it can have a role, but not great. This is another one. I thought this would be a really great card when it first came out, but we've not seen it used much. Toxic Entanglement. It's kind of like the Stratagem hard removal for Tyranids. It's not unplayable, but it doesn't deal with the unit when you play it. For 4 energy, you really need it to do that. Tyranids built well can often end the game by sort of E7, E8, and at that point your opponent won't have played anything that will need a kind of hard removal stratagem. You should be able to deal with it with your units, so it kind of just doesn't really fit all that well. Now, if we get really slow late game metas all of a sudden, then I can see this card definitely, you know, having more of a role to play. You know, if Imperial Guard tanks take over, maybe I could see this having more of a role to play. But as the meta has been, and as it stands, I don't think it's a very good card. I think it's 2 stars at best. Similar with the Tyranid Invasion, like, I can't say it's unplayable, like getting 4 2-drops. I mean, technically, there's a value there, but there's a lot of bad 2-drops. That's what holds this card back. You might say, BJ, 4 2-drops, that's like 8 energy worth, you're getting it for 6. Yeah, but what 2-drops are you getting, right? And that's the problem. That's the problem with this card, is the quality of the 2-drops that you're drawing. In other factions, this card would be really good, but in this faction, it's a pretty bad card, to be honest. Alright, next up, let's have a look at the Toxic Miasma. This card says 3 energy blind to random enemies. Again, like I think about the Orc one that does a blind for every vehicle that you've got. You can often do more than 2, it only costs you 2. I think this is an overpriced stratagem. It's also a bit of a problem because, like, that situation you're looking for when you want a blind 2 is quite situational, and I don't know that you can afford in a Tyranid deck to just like have this 3-drop sitting in your hand as one of your cards where it's just not the right turn to play it. Like, you need to be building the board, and that doesn't really help you do it. Alright, Leviathan's Tendrils is the draw card. Most factions have a 3 energy draw. It's not terrible, and it does give 1 health, which is a buff that was recently added. I think the biggest thing about Leviathan Tendrils is, again, about how the Tyranids generally build. When you see good decks, you often don't need card draw because of the value you get, the 3-to-1s, 2-for-1s from the Synapse, things like Swarm, and also Tyranids tend to be a faction where you build. The building of a good deck is the attention you pay to your curve. And if you pay good attention to your curve and you build the deck well, then you never really reach a point where you kind of just need to draw cards. And certainly that you have the 3 spare energy to do that, right? Like, that's the other drawback with this card, is that by doing this, you're taking a turn off tempo, which, again, Tyranids are just not a faction that can really afford to do that, because they don't have loads of great come from behind mechanics, and they're all about building the board. So overall, in the Tyranids, I think that's a bad card. And I also think the Pyrovore is a bad card. It's a nice, cool gimmick, like when another troop dies, heal 2. But ultimately, I just don't think it's good enough. And the 1 melee attack means that your opponent will they will deal with this. Like, they won't want this to stick around, but I don't think it's that hard for them to deal with it. So, like I said, not an unplayable card. See you using it in draft and beginner decks and stuff, but I think definitely once you open up the factions full potential, you won't be running that card. And similar with this, hyper adaptation, this is one of the stratagems that you could play on a Synapse. It's not terrible, it's just that there are way better ones. The reason why this is it's bad compared to the others, right? Like, so what will happen is, once you've unlocked your full collection, when you look at the amount of slots you've got in your deck to play as these strats, these buff strats, you just will never get to that one because all the others are so much better. Next up, we got the Ambush Predator. The Ambush Predator is a give camouflage to a friendly unit. Now, if you're in a kind of particularly heavy, hard removal type of meta, I can see a world where you do put one of these in, but more often than not, you're going to go for things like the stealth options instead, which are just far more reliable. So, usually, we very rarely see this card played. Next up, we have the Winged Tyrant. This one makes me a little bit sad because it's actually okay. It's just that it's gone through a number of iterations and buffs, and it's actually okay now. The question is, which stratagem do you want to reduce the cost to 0 when it does come down? And you have to have that stratagem in your hand, so it's not very practical. And not to mention the fact that it's a 9-drop, like a 9-drop that when it comes down doesn't do anything if you don't have the right stratagem in place. So it tends to just be like, in theory, okay, but in practice, bad. Yeah, and you very rarely even get to play it, to be honest, because you've usually won or lost the game by that point. The Maleceptor is a fun one. I quite like this card. I like the idea of it. I think it needs a buff. I think it needs a stat buff. To be honest with you, I feel like 4 melee is like, even just looking at the artwork, I think you could get away with giving this a bit more. I wouldn't mind seeing a small buff to it, to be honest. And I actually think this card could be redeemable, but as it is right now, it's very expensive for what it's doing. And so I think overall, 2 stars is the best I can give it. Now, the Morlock, this is where we start to get a bit difficult, because I don't know whether this is correct, whether I think it's a 2 or a 3 stars. I've gone with 2 stars. You know, you can think of this almost like an AoE card, right? Because you play the card, it's really hard to remove, and when it attacks, it does 5 damage to one unit and 3 to the other 2. But the difference is that Vanguard can mess with that, right? Because it determines the positioning, whereas if it was an AoE, you could place that where you wanted. Something like Scorcher Assault, for example. So it has a drawback. And then the other thing is that it goes back into your deck, reduces cost by 3, which sounds really cool. I love a deck that just keeps drawing through and replaying Morlocks. The game doesn't work like that. It's very rare, especially in Tyranids, that you ever see it again. It goes back in your deck and you'll never see it again. So I think it's just a cool kind of concept that in practice doesn't really play out. Ravener is the anti-stealth in the faction. I have run this card. I've been massively underwhelmed by it. It's cool if you do happen to have it in your hand. It's so situational because you have to have it in your hand and they have to play a stealth unit. And so that will mean that the vast majority of the situations, you'll have this in your hand and they won't have a stealth unit, in which case it's a bad play. Or they'll have a stealth unit and you won't have it in your hand even though it's in your deck. So, and then putting 2 of them in your deck is just even worse. So I just think overall, it's a cute idea, but it's actually still a bad card. And then last but not least, the Norm Emissary. Again, I think the Norm Emissary is a cool concept. It's not an unplayable card. I've definitely made it work in Neurothrope. Probably in a Neurothrope, this should be a 3-star, if I was specifically talking about a Neurothrope deck. Because it can act as the wing con. And using like the flank stratagem to then attack with this is really cool, and it can be a really nice finisher. But it's a bit memey. It's not anywhere near the kind of like more powerful decks. So they're not unplayable, but probably towards the top end of bad, I would say. Alright, let's move on to our 3-star cards. So our 3 out of 5, these cards are good in the right situation, the right meta. If otherwise they're just a bit okay or a bit meh. This is the Spore. Now, I think this Spore is a really great 2-drop a lot of the time, particularly when you are in metas where you really need to fight for the early game. that's when I tend to tech in the Mucilist Spore. When you're not in those metas, it can be a bit meh, because it's like, well, you play it because you've got it, but then it just dies anyway, so it kind of has anti-synergy with the whole trying to build a board type of approach to the Tyranids. So yeah, in the right situation, pretty cool. Okay, this one would have been a bad card, but it just recently had a buff, so these stats aren't correct. I get these cards from the website, by the way, which, even though they make the balance patch, they always update the cards on there. So there's actually got 4 health. I think this card is reasonable now for a 3-drop, you know, like it's got a fair chance of surviving. With the Tide as well, like on E6, playing 2 of these down for 8 health. 8 health for 6 is pretty good. And obviously, once it's blasting away and getting benefited from from stratagems and stuff, then it can become a real problem for your opponent. So, yeah, it's pretty nice. I don't think it's the best 3-drop in the factions by any means, but I think it's getting there. This is one that's pretty cool. I think of this like the Carnifex for the Neurothrope in a way. Basically, giving you a kind of fairly solid body for 5, like good health. Stats are mediocre but can't be cheated, like mediocre but balanced. And then quite a nice little rally where it essentially the Feeding Frenzy is pretty good actually, like giving you the heal after killing something, and that cheap ping which again Tyranids don't have a lot of access to. So the Psychophage is not bad, and it's not a bad one to kind of test out instead of that Carnifex at times. Now, next card is an interesting one. The High Fleet Leviathan. This is a legendary card. Your troops cost 1 less for the rest of this battle. Draw a troop from your deck. Hard card to evaluate because it depends what type of Tyranid deck you want to play. If you want to play a Tervigon late game inevitable deck, this is probably the first legendary you want to craft. It's central to that style of play. The downside to this card is it kind of doesn't really do anything outside of that particular archetype. So generally speaking, that's why I've put it as a 3-star, because it's very good in that one archetype and pretty useless in the others. So it's kind of hard to kind of review in a vacuum. That's why I just went for that 3. But of course, if you're running that Tervigon deck, this card is phenomenal and will ultimately lead you to having being able to play your whole hand out for free, ultimately, with Overwhelming Swarm. Right, next up, we got the Augmented Ferocity. So this is a stratagem that we have to take more seriously. It's a very aggressive stratagem. It's one that fits very well into when you're running your Swarmlord builds that are stealth heavy, and what you're trying to do is just beat down your opponent and kind of race, potentially in a Terror of Vardengast type of aggro deck as well. Then it's really good because the heal 3 is nice, but the giving the +2 melee is really good, and it does say unit, and that means your Synapse can make your Warlord benefit from that +2 as well. It's a very aggressive stratagem, more aggression over board building, I would say. Alright, next up we have the Adrenal Surge. Adrenal Surge is pretty good in the right situations. Like, it can be a part of your finisher, playing this with the Ravenous Hunter, giving everything +2 attack, and then obviously they get the double attacks. Is very good. It's also just not a bad stratagem to hold early. You know, you think about playing this on a Tervigon or a Neurothrope, suddenly they've got 4 damage that they can deal. So really good at dealing with the early game. Your opponent plays Sternguard, you can play this. Or even on Swarmlord, like imagine playing this on Swarmlord. He can do 5 melee damage on his own, so he can remove early mid-game, mid-range units, just the Warlord with this. So quite a nice like little removal tool, and it's quite good for Synapse kind of like combo finishers and stuff. But like I say, those are very specific situations in the game, and outside of those, you'll just be sitting there wishing it was another card. Bounding Leap is one of my kind of personal biased favourites. Kind of like really enjoy it when this pulls off, just because it's kind of cool putting it on a Synapse creature and suddenly like all your board having Blast 2, you know, like three unit. It does include your Lord, right? Giving Blast 2 to a friendly unit, not troop. So your Lord can end up getting the Blast. And also, it can stack with other blasts. So if you put it on a unit that has Blast 2, now it has Blast 4. So really good, very, very good tech card to put in the go wide type of metas. Next up, we have the Hive Tyrant. The Hive Tyrant is a 7-drop that is very solid. It tends to be a card that comes in to my like Swarm Lord board building decks when the meta's just a little bit slower, right? When you just want to go that little bit higher, because a lot of the time your curve sort of stops at 6 in the main Swarm Lord builds, and I think the Hive Tyrant is just that perfect addition when you just want to go just a little bit longer, just a little bit bigger. The Synaptic Imperative, which is the talent, is phenomenal. It's basically the Swarm Lord's ability, but instead of giving everything +1, it gives everything +2. So it's really powerful. If you go into like the later turns, you play this on 7, and you got, you know, another 3 turns. My God, this guy he'll tip you over the edge. The reality though is that again, there'll just be many games you just don't really use him. You just don't either get to him for his value to really pay off. So really strong card, but you need a slightly slower game for it to work. Now, a similar thing with Von Ryans, actually. Von Ryans is like, we could talk about it at the same time as the Lictor. These are both your 4-drops that have stealth. I personally prefer the Lictor because it's just better to play on E4, which is what you'll want to do more often than not. But where Von Ryans is really good is like when you use Disruption Pool on E6, you can play 2 of these because Disruption Pool makes one of them 2 cheaper. So that means that you could essentially, because of the tide, you can benefit from this from E6, right? And you can double that up. And then it's really good, right? Because if you've got a 10, you know, a 10 attack guy on E6, I mean, that's awesome. But power ceiling higher with Von Ryans, but consistency better Lictor. So, yeah. Again, both having 0 range attack means that once they come out of stealth and attack, that's it. They're going to get traded for free on the comeback. So they suit very aggro decks. Now, the Venom is interesting. It's the 2nd best 4-drop in terms of the health value in the game. I think the Astra Militarum banner is the new winner for that. It puts out 8. This one puts out 6. But key thing with the Venom Throw is this is your hard removal. Now, you have to really play with the flank stratagem to get the max value out of the Venom Throw, or you dump it on the board and put it into stealth. That's generally how you want to be using this guy. You can just play it kind of naked on tempo, especially on 4, and hope that your opponent can't remove it. But obviously, very, very powerful with those stratagems that I mentioned. And then we got the Biovore. Now, the Biovore is a good 3-drop for tempo. Being able to put a Spore Mine out means that you're putting a lot of stats out that your opponent has to deal with. And it's a good pressure 3-drop. Obviously, only 1 melee is its weakness, and that's what your opponent's going to expose and try and get rid of this. But if you're just playing, building the rest of your deck around heavy tempo, this can add to that pressure game plan. Overwhelming Swarm. Again, depends on the type of deck you're doing. If you're doing the Tervagon deck, this is essential. You can do some crazy combos with this card, making everything cost 1 less. If you've already played the High Fleet Leviathan Legendary, making everything cost 1 less, that means everything now costs 2 less, which is just bonkers because you can empty your whole hand. And also the new Neuro Gaunt, which only costs 1. If you use on E5 with this, which costs 3, and then the 2-drop Infestation node, you can basically copy the Neuro Gaunts and end up putting something like 9 copies of it down. It's one of the most broken E5 combos in the game. But why is it 3 stars? Because again, outside of that deck, it's pretty useless. You don't see it in the Swarm mods. You don't see it in the Neurophobes. Now, the Hormigaunt is actually decent. It's one of probably more overlooked cards in a way. It's actually okay, you know, like the stats are alright, and like, again, playing this on 4, playing 2 of them, so getting a 6/6 for 4, it's actually not bad. It doesn't have stealth, but the stats are better than the stealth units, and then of course you can do the same on 6 and the same on 8. You know, play this on 8, you've got a 12/12. It's not bad. So it scales quite well with the Tide. Like I say, it's not the best ever, and obviously it has only got the 0 range attack, so that's the weakness. It will get punished. But very good into like Tyranid and Chaos, sometimes Orc metas. Ripper Swarm is pretty good in the right situation. Again, when you're playing Overwhelming Swarm, when you're playing the Tervigon deck, this card's really good. The other place though where the Ripper Swarm shines is with the Terror of Ardengast. It almost acts like a counterintuitive finisher. What you do is around E6-ish, you kind of just play this out and you put all the swarms next to each other, so you've created 4 separate units. Obviously, you then use the Alpha Warrior from the Terror of Ardengast, the Warlord talent, and he gets a bonus to his attack for each body on the board. So what you're doing is kind of like fueling up your Warlord, basically, to have this massive attack. Pretty cool. Pretty flexible card. First of the Warlords, the Neurothrope. I really like the Neurothrope. Really enjoy it. I like the one energy Warlord powers. You can play them more often. They fit in with the curve better. And Neurothrope's pretty cool. I like his playstyle. Like lots of synapse, basically, lots of triggering synapse. I really like the. It just doesn't feel quite as powerful. You won't get the same win rate as Swarmlord, but you can do well with that deck. You definitely can do. You can do okay with this deck and this Warlord. So, you know, flexibility. It gives you lots of flexibility. It can heal. It can do damage, ping damage. Yeah, I like the Neurothrope. I think it's one of the more well-balanced Warlords in the game, to be honest. So it's not broken, but it's not weak either. Alright, so that's our situational 3 stars. Let's have a look at our 4-star cards. These are the good cards. These are what will be in most Tyranid decks. The Neuraloid. A 0-cost Synapse is just superb, because whichever stratagem you look at, you've only got to consider the cost of the stratagem when you've got this guy in hand, right? To be able to spread that out and do it to 3 units. So very, very powerful, because the tempo, it gives you the ability to trigger Synapse for no additional cost. Now, I've got the Terror of Ardengast as good as well. We have mixed... I think people in the community have very mixed views on Terror. It's one of them Warlords where, like, when I play it, I just don't lose with it. It's a real aggro Warlord. It has poor synergy with a lot of the cards. It almost doesn't feel like a Tyranid card, because it doesn't really play with Synapse. It doesn't really play with Swarm, except for like Rippers going wide, which is not really what Swarm's meant to be. Swarm's meant to stack up. It just doesn't seem to fit. But the Alpha Warrior talent is powerful, very powerful, right? Like, this guy can often just do 12 damage. I mean, it's not unheard of. Like, he's a beast, and the fact that he's flying as well means that flying won't help you. So he's an ultimate anti-fly. He'll take out those big tanks, big flying tanks, no problem whatsoever. Yeah, he's an aggro beast. If you just like beatdown, Terror is pretty good. I think it's a good card. I think it's not the best Warlord in the faction, but I think it's pretty good. Now, this is one of my favourite cards as well, the Infestation Node. It's not used in every Tyranid deck, but it's really powerful. It gives you heal, only to your troops. Obviously, you can Synapse again. But what it does, it creates copies in your hand. Now, this is one of the reasons why I think Leviathan Tendrils is a bad card, because this card exists and is a good card. If you want extra cards, play this, not Leviathan Tendrils, because you then get to choose what you put it on. You also get a heal benefit as well on board, so you're affecting board more with it, and you're getting possibly 3 cards from it if you put this on a Synapse with 2 other units down. I already mentioned the combo you can do as well with that card on turn 5 with the Overwhelming Swarm and the Neurogons. Okay, the Harpy. Now, you know, a lot of people would say, not sure, Benjamin, this is a 3-star. I think this is a 4-star, because the reason why I say that is it's a flyer. On 7, it's got 8 health, which is very good. 8 health flying is really good. Stats are very good, because 7 range attack, which is what most units are going to have to attack. Well, good luck. Like, 7 for 7 is more than acceptable. Even those, like, Vet Stormboys, those flying melee damage dealers, have still got to deal with 4. So 4's not like... 4's, like, not the lowest, you know? Like, 4's still something. And the other thing with the Harpy is, whenever it gets attacked... This is the old wording. Whenever it gets attacked now... In fact, whenever an opponent attacks anything, it's not even attacking this. They could attack your Warlord, they could attack another unit. It puts out a Spore Mine. That is super powerful. If you've not used this card, guys, go and use it, because I found this to be better in practice than it is in theory. I think it's quite strong. The biggest downside to it is that it's a 7-drop, and again, good Tyranid decks have often decided the game before they need to play that. Screamer Killer's a bit like that too. Screamer Killer's a bit like what I said about the Hive Tyrant. It's a solid card, and it's pretty good. You know, it's good stats. It's survivable. It's got AoE damage. Can't be cheated very easy. The main thing is you need the meta to be a tiny bit slower. And it's better at trading down. So it's better in kind of like go wide, smaller metas than it is in kind of like tall metas. But it's a good card. It's a really well statted card, and it's in a lot of slightly slower decks. And so is the Zone Throw. Zone Throw, even though it says it's a 5-drop, in a way, you want to be playing it on 7E when you can play the Swarmlord Power with it or something like that. Maybe 6E. It's just benefits, obviously. Every time you trigger Synapse, you deal 1 to 3 to a random enemy. This can help you finish the Warlord off. It can help you deal with things in stealth. Then just generally fight for the board. And it's got decent stats as well. The Tyrant Guard is the big vanguard of the deck, and it's a good card because on turn 5 it can be a real annoyance when you're a board building deck. It can save your other units. You can buff this with the heal from many of the Warlords, as well as giving it things like the extra armor and other stratagems that like enhanced organism, which boosts its health. So in this faction, this type of deck can actually be a win con in many ways if your opponent can't deal with it. Obviously, there's a lot of range units at the minute, and that's a little bit of a weakness for the unit. But there are even ways of giving it range attack with things like Adrenal Surge and the Swarmlord's talent as well. Alright, next up, Death Leaper. Solid card, guys. This is one of those 5-drops that you want to put in, tech in when you're going to go stealth, when you're going to go aggro, when you're going to go down the Lictor and the what was the Augmented Ferocity, you know, the real aggro version of the decks. Death Leaper can even go in a Terror Vardengast type of build, right? Being in stealth, coming out and attacking, and then not only doing 7 damage but stunning a unit as well. It's a really powerful effect. Yes, it will die after that, but it's kind of already done its thing. So that's why it's a good card, because it gets to do its thing, and it's very hard to remove when it's got the stealth. Next up, we got the Spore Assist. I think this is a good card. It's one you want to play in the Neurothrope deck, which is why it perhaps is. I don't know, maybe some people might give this a 3-star, because it's not seen as much as some of the other big hitters, but that's just because Neurothrope's not quite as powerful as a build than the Swarmlord. But the card in itself is strong. It's got good health, and a really good Synapse ability with Artifice deploy a Spawn Mine. You don't even have to trigger Synapse, it's just Artifice. So this is one of those rare cards, excuse me, even triggers with things like Darkened Skies, you know. So this is just great in a Neurothrope deck. You want to 100% be running 2 of these for your early kind of mid game. And Tyranid Warrior is a solid 3-drop, right? Just solid, you know. Really good stats, the 4 health, the 3/3. Just can't be cheated. Can trade with, you know, pretty much anything else in the game that's come out at that point. And then the icing on the cake is that it's got Synapse. So that's what makes it trade well into the late game, because you can play this with spells and give Synapse. So really good 3-drop. And speaking of good 3-drops, the Gene Stealer, it's gone through a few iterations, but now, as soon as it got stealth, didn't used to have stealth, guys, but once this thing got stealth, then it just became really good, because you can basically build your entire early game around this card, right? A Swarmlord can just put this down on 3. You can put another one down on 4. By the way, you don't want to swarm it up when you do that. You want to make sure that the new one goes into stealth. And it just enables you to like keep up with board until you get to play your slightly bigger units. Of course, towards the end of the game, it scales well, because you can do things like then you can swarm up to have like a big finisher. The Neurothrope is... the Neuro Tyrant is a beast in terms of stats, right? Like, One of the things people love to do is to play this card on E4 with the disruption pool. You'll hear me say that a lot probably in this, but yeah, I mean, playing this out on 4, it's like your opponent just can't deal with it. Even playing it on 6, it's very, very good. If they can't kill it, the next turn can be really brutal. I do think you need to build the deck around it a little bit, because what you want with this card is to really benefit from the cheap stratagems, right? So you want stratagems that you want to play multiple times. That's what his ability lets you do. So if you've got a two costing stratagem on turn 7, for example, you could play that out, you know, 3 times or something. So yeah, good stats, good ability. You'll see it more in like a Tervagon build. It's not really needed that much in Swarm mode. Now the Neurogaunt Node Beast is one that has been a staple now for a long time. You can play it on 2 if you just need a cheap synapse that can't be taken out by the enemy warlord, just combine with those stratagems. But the other thing is, you often see this as the 4-drop, right? Like on turn 4, play 2 of these because it's got tied, play 2 of these and double them up, and you have a bigger 6 health 4-drop synapse creature. Yeah, it's an epic, you got to collect it, but it's worth doing. It's in most decks. Next up, we've got the Tervigon. Now, the big daddy warlord that you actually begin the game with. Kind of interesting in a way, because Tervigon is like maybe the hardest warlord to play. It's interesting it's the beginner one. It's also the one with the most unique playstyle, which is also interesting that it's the beginner one, because it just doesn't play like any of the other Tyranid builds. And again, really weird that this is starting warlord. I think you need to make a decision quite early on as a Tyranid collector. Do you want to go down the Tervigon route or not? Because if you do, then the way you collect your cards and the order you prioritize are very different from, say, if you're going to go more down the Neurothrop and Swarmlord route. So I think that's one of the things that's interesting. But what I will say about the Tervigon is it's hard to master. Once you have the cards and you know how to play it, it's very powerful. And it's often a real prey deck. What I mean by that is it's a deck that often when the meta is established, that Tervigon can beat a lot of the top tier decks. So it can prey on those. What it struggles with are the really fast aggro-y type decks. But as soon as the meta gets kind of slow, you know, things like Junif and Orc Control and stuff like that, Tervigon can be a real disruptor. Alright guys, that is our good cards. But let's take a look at our exceptionally good S tier must-have 5-star cards. Well, the first one is the Neurogaunt. Now, this recently got a buff, which is why, again, on here, the stat says 2, but it actually only costs 1 energy, guys. And it's just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. At 1 energy, it's ridiculous. You can play, you know, you can play them out and get a big unit, really cheap, really cost-effective, and it plays so well with Overwhelming Swarm, as I've already mentioned a couple of times. Making this free, playing out the full tide, is really good. If you then play Infestation Node and get copies of it, which are also then free, then it's broken. So very powerful Synapse creature now since they made the buff. This one I wasn't sure about making 4 stars or 5 stars, but in the end I kept it as 5 stars. What does it do? It gives flank for only 1 energy. And you've got to remember that means that with Synapse, you can potentially give 2 or 3 units flank in 1 turn for 1. And that can completely turn a board state. Also very powerful with things like the Norm Emissary or things like the Venom Throw for hard removal. Next up, we've got the Tyranid Prime. Now, the Tyranid Prime is... hold up. No, that didn't work, did it? To front. Ah. Okay, so the Tyranid Prime is a 5-star because in the 4-drop slot, this card is often just used as a really solid statted 4-drop. As I said before, the Tyranids really want to build a solid board, and snowball from there. And this card plays into that just on its own, just because it has a really well statted body, and that is often what it's used for. It does have synapse, so you can certainly use that and start to get triggers. And there's another ability, which is that friendly units that swarm gain +1 melee attack and +1 health. If you get that off, it's just icing on the cake stuff, guys. But you don't generally play this card for that in mind, so don't kind of hold around sweating, waiting for an opportunity to do that. Just play this down as a really solid 4-drop, and if you want to use Synapse, then you can. But, you know, the stats speak for themselves. Really, really solid. Okay, now then, next up we're going to have the Gargoyle. So the Gargoyle got changed. It didn't used to have flank, and the second this got flank, it became S tier. Because you can have a 3 energy flanker for free, or you can have a 6 energy flanker dealing 6 damage, or a 9 energy flanker doing 9 damage because of the tied 2. So very, very flexible. Amazing once Tyranids received some flank. It really turned the fact. This did more to transform the faction's power than probably anything. Really, really solid. Really pivotal. In a faction that doesn't have a lot of flank, right? So, like, Gargoyle is just one true flanker in the faction. So, very, very important card. Alright, next up we got the Enhanced Organism. Now, this is one of the key strats. This is one of the S tier strats. Most top tier Tyranid players play this, because for very, very cheap, you can give 3 health to a friendly unit. When it says unit and not troop, that matters, because that means your Warlord benefits too. So, imagine playing this on the Broodlord that's next to your Warlord. That's +6 health to your Warlord. Or, you know, if you've got a Broodlord next to your Warlord and a unit, that's all 3 of them getting +6 health. This card is incredibly good return on investment for only 2 cost, and that's why it's one of the S tier. You remember, the game is to try and build a board and snowball. Well, that card will help you your board survive, and as will this one, the Hardened Biology, another S tier card, really top tier stratagem. The thing with this card is, like, if you get this off, never mind a Broodlord, which gets this off twice, but if you play this on just a normal Synapse creature, it does say troops. Your Warlord doesn't get armor. Before you get excited, but still, you talk about establishing a board. If you play this on a Neuraloid for free, your Neuraloid 0 cost, and between 2 of the units, in other words, if 3 units are getting +2 health and armor, they've actually changed this. I think it's +1 health now. But the point is that it's really difficult for your opponent to come back and deal with that board state. You know, 2 armor on 3 units for that cost is so broken. It's so powerful, and yeah, it's a real winner. So definitely recommend the Hardened Biology. Next up, we've got one of my favourites, the Trusty Carnifex. Now, the best thing about this card is that it's a common card, so all Tyranid players will start with this card, which is awesome. And yeah, it's just a really solid statted 5-drop. It has everything you want. It comes with 6 health for only 5 cost. It's got that 4/4 stats, which allow it to trade into anything in the game up to that point. And you get a choice. Do you want melee? Do you want extra range attack? Or do you want armor? Now, top tip if you're new, 90% of the time you want to be picking the armor. You know, this stat line with armor for 5 is really, really solid. Really strong. And in a board building faction where you're trying to establish dominance on board, that is exactly the type of unit you want. The other thing with the card effects is with a disruption pool, you can play that on turn 2. that is, your opponent can't deal with that. The flankers at that stage of the game can't get rid of it once it's got armor on. Another one that works really well with the disruption pool is the Hive Crone. The Hive Crone is a superb 6-drop. Being able to come down on 4 with the pool, or coming down on 6 and just having an immediate impact on the board, dealing 3 damage, and then having such good stats for a winged flying creature, your opponent is going to really struggle to deal with the 7 health, and it's pretty good against enemy flyers with the 5 melee. Overall, the Hive Crone is just a really solid card that's been pretty much the priority 6-drop in the faction for a long time now. Now, one 6-drop that is actually a stratagem that has become incredibly popular is the Rapacious Hunger, and that's because this card got a buff. It used to only deal 2 damage, now it deals 3 damage to all enemies, and for each one that dies, heal 2. So it's got the double whammy of being the AoE for the faction and giving heal as well. And by the way, friendly unit, so If your Warlord's the only thing that is damaged, all the heal will go on your Warlord. And this is good right now where we've got Astra Militarum, lots of 3 health things, Sisters of Battle, lots of 3 health things, Tau, lots of drones. So all those go wide metas, Rapacious Hunger just has an absolute field day against. I've talked about it a lot, guys, and I don't normally put defense and offense stratagems in this, but I thought about it long and hard, and you can't talk about Hive Fleet Leviathan, you can't talk about the Tyranids without talking about the digestion pool. There is not a defense stratagem in the game that is more important for a faction than the digestion pool is for the Tyranids. It's both a strength and a weakness in that regard. I always say to Tyranid players, I didn't even start playing Tyranids until I'd got level 20 on the Forge. Because there's no point, but because the faction and the win rate and everything completely transforms once 50% of your games you get in the digestion pool. Being able to cheat out a troop 2 turns earlier, like we've talked about, a Hive Crone, a Carnifex, etc., is so pivotal when the aim of the game is to try and build a board that snowballs and dominates the board. Like, this is such a synergistic defense card, and that's why I'm including it, and that's why it's also S tier. Get yourself to level 20 on Forge as soon as possible, guys, and start having some fun. Now, talk about S tier stratagems. This is like the king of kings. Pretty much. You know, outside of the legendaries anyway, I mean, giving stealth to a friendly troop, that's powerful anyway, but when you can give stealth to a friendly troop in a faction that has synapse, you can hide 3 troops. This is such a game winner. Like, the amount of times you can put a board state down, your opponent's thinking, oh, I've got the tools to clear that, and then you whack this on, and they're like, damn it, I can't touch his board. I mean, it's such an unfair advantage. Next turn, your mana's refilled. You can now put on all the stratagems like Hardened Biology or play the Swarmlord Warlord power. Or you can just go and lethal your opponent, depending on what stage of the game it is. It's such a tempo cheat. Circle of Prey is pivotal. 2 of these should be in every Tyranid deck in the game. Okay, we're going to finish out, guys, with a lot of legendaries, basically. All of the best ones. So the first one is the Infinite Biomorphologies. For 2 energy, this thing gives an effect, and you can get things like +2 health, for example. So you give everything +2 health. If that's a swarm unit, all of the tied copies will also have the +2 health. You can give armor to a unit. You can give range damage to a unit. This is absolutely superb. It works. It's the one legendary that is just good no matter what deck you're playing, because you put this. This works incredibly well in a Tervigon deck where you put loads of Tervigons in your hand and you give them all buffs, and it works really well in a Swarmlord or a Neurothrope deck as well. So that is a legendary that in many ways could be the first legendary you craft, because it's just always good. It's good in any type of Tyranid deck. Now, the Swarmlord is probably the penultimate troop in the faction, because it's a legendary, and it is a troop that has synapse. It has stealth, so it can't be killed the turn it comes down, pretty much. And when it goes off from synapse, it triggers it twice. That's bananas, guys. like we already said, didn't we? Casting these big, powerful things like Enhanced Organism or Hardened Biology. I mean, Hardened Biology on this guy is giving 4 armor to everything, guys. That's just game over. Like, it's bonkers. Yeah, really cool card. Really, really cool. Will set up finishers really nicely, and including the card we're about to talk about, which is the Ravenous Hunter. One of the best combo finisher cards in the game. Maybe the single card that accounts for the most wins, particularly in Tyranid faction. Like, this card is bonkers. Stick this on, you know, like I say, you can put the Broodlord down or any other, any other synapse that survives. Next turn you play this, and it gives Bloodthirst to a friendly unit. And again, unit includes your Warlord, right? So even if this was just on your Broodlord next to your Warlord, that's your Broodlord and your Warlord being able to attack twice, guys. That's what Bloodthirst does. You can attack twice that turn. Really, really sick. Of course, you can buff them with things like the Swarmlord power or Adrenal Surge, and still then attack twice with this. So it leads to insane combos. It leads to you being able to kill your opponent, do 15, 20, I've done over 40 damage with certain combos with this, so it's really, really powerful. Definitely a really key one that you want to get, and goes in again pretty much all your decks. Alright guys, so the last one on the list, the Swarm Horde. It's very rare that I often would talk about spending a legendary on a warlord version, because I kind of think you've already got 2 warlords. You could probably prioritize the legendaries on other things. But I do think Swarm Horde is the exception, because it's the best warlord, and it's had a good win rate for a long time now. It's very unique because, yes, it's weak to flyers because it only has 1 range attack, but having 3 melee is so important. It's so good. Not only does it help win races with beatdown and stuff, but more importantly, you can deal with your opponent's board without spending any energy, right? You can kill a Space Marine sergeant, a Stern Guard sergeant with 3 health without having to invest any additional power. Something like Imhotep can kill 3 health too, but he has to use his Warlord power. Swarm Horde doesn't have to do that. So that 3 melee is a real advantage, and it's one of the things that's made him stand out, especially combining with things like we just said, like Ravenous Hunter and these stratagems that affect units, including the Warlord. You know, Swarm Horde attacking twice, having that extra, making even more, leveraging even more that attack, that melee attack. It's just super powerful. So, and as I say, the #1 decks from Tyranid for a long time now have been the Swarm Horde. So, when it comes to collecting your legendaries, I think you've got to decide really: do you want more of a Tervagon build, or a Swarm Lord, or even kind of like Neuro Tyrant, kind of a Neurothrope type of build? I would count that in the same one as the Swarm Lord. If you're going down the more typical kind of Swarm Lord, kind of board building, tempo, play on tempo, slightly easier play style. Not saying it's easy, but it's easier. If you're going down that, then I think you want to be really prioritizing Ravenous Hunter, Broodlord, and Infinite Biomorphologist for your legendary cards. But if you're wanting to go more down the Tervagon route, I think that's where these cards are kind of critical to this style of play. Like the High Fleet Leviathan is an obvious one. Again, Infinite Biomorphologies, because you're going to basically use Talent Brood Progenitor to basically create a handful of Termagants, and then you're going to use the Infinite Biomorphologies to just buff all of them. Super powerful. Again, maybe that's one that should be your first craft, because it's just good in all decks. And then last but not least, I think the Neurotype. The Neurotype's very good in Tervagon. Just because we do run a number of good spells, and so this can be, whilst you're waiting to kind of build up like a mega combo, this can be a nice mid-game kind of turn to distract your opponent and do some cool stuff, or play multiple Infinite Biomorphologies, for example. When you've got this down, that's a cool combination. So yeah, it depends which way you want to go. Overall, guys, I think the Tyranids are a really good faction. Go and check out my Tyranid intro video if you've not seen it yet. Let me know in the comments what you think, and please hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks for all the support, and I'll see you in the next one, guys.